Hello out there. It is Tuesday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. My name is Ryan Catherwood. You're watching another edition of Advancement Live. For those of you who are tuning in just for the first time, we do appreciate it. Advancement Live is a bi-monthly web show, and it is part of the HigherEdLive network, which is a series of professional development web shows, podcasts, and they are always free and accessible to you, both on the HigherEdLive.com website, as well as you can download the HigherEdLive app on iTunes and listen to the podcast after the fact. Do be sure to subscribe to the HigherEdLive newsletter. You can do that on HigherEdLive.com. And if you are a Twitter fan, then be sure to ask us questions during the course of the broadcast using the hashtag HigherEdLive. Got a great show for you today, bringing together a couple of the industry's finest magazine editors from around the country who I'll introduce to you in just a moment. But before I do, I would like to introduce our fantastic Higher Advancement Live sponsors. iModules. How do you focus your engagement efforts where it will have the most impact? Actionable insights from iModules reveals new intelligence about a constituent's level of online engagement, as well as their likelihood for online engagement with your specific institution. Had a chance to take a look at that product when I was at the Sizzler conference in Kansas City over the summer, and it is very cool. Definitely check out the actionable insights, and I'm tweeting out a link to the video to have a look as well. HigherEdLive is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with educational institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Let's stop using PDFs and start getting smart with online forums. Learn more about the challenges higher education faces putting forms online, and see some real-world success stories during M. Stoner's complimentary webinar on December the 2nd. I just tweeted out a link that you can check out and sign up for that webinar. All right, now back to my guests. It is wonderful to have first Mr. David Brittan. David was drawn to magazines because they merge information and entertainment, and because he loves big, pretty pictures. Lots of them in the Tufts Magazine. Editor of Tufts Magazine since 2006. He was previously managing editor of IBM's Think Research and a senior editor of MIT's Technology Review. His essays and articles have appeared in The New Republic, New Scientist, and many other publications.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you. Thank you, David. Also on the program today is Matt Dewald. He's been editor of the Alumni Magazine and the Law School Alumni Magazine at the University of Richmond in Virginia since 2012. Prior to the University of Richmond, my alma mater, Matt was the editor of the University of Dayton Magazine and a writer and editor for a variety of other print, online, and social media outlets. And last but absolutely not least, Dale Keiger. Dale is the editor of Johns Hopkins Magazine and publisher of You Magazinology website. I imagine lots of folks are tuning into the show because they learned about it from You Magazinology. It's a service to the community of alumni magazine editors, writers, and designers by Johns Hopkins Magazine and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Communications. Dale has been with Johns Hopkins for almost 23 years. But it is a great pleasure to have a show today about print edition alumni magazines. They are really one of the primary vehicles to reach all constituents that most universities have in place. They come in all shapes, sizes, and frequencies, and I'm sure there is a ton of strategy behind putting together an alumni magazine, which we will talk about today. So starting off the program, Matt, first question goes to you. Can you tell viewers what makes a great alumni magazine, and what is the purpose of an alumni magazine?
Sure, and thanks for having me here, Ryan. It's an interesting question to start off with, because I think you get a lot of different answers from a lot of different people about that. But for me, it really comes down to one basic fundamental criterion, which is, do people read it, right? You know, these alumni magazines are vehicles for a lot of communication about the university. Lots of different offices, they want messages in it, they want to sort of shape what it is that we're saying and all that. But at the end of the day, if we're producing it in a way that people aren't reading it, you know, if it's going from the mailbox to the recycling bin, we're not doing our jobs, and we're not accomplishing any of the other things that we want to accomplish unless people are actually reading it. You know, there's a story that a colleague of mine here at the University of Richmond tells. It predates my arrival here at 2012, but he talks about the old Alumni magazine before we redesigned. He was at a University of Richmond football game on a rainy day, and he sat down, took a seat, and saw an alum come and down the aisle to sit next to him. And of course, you know, it's a rainy day, so the benches are all wet. And she looks around for something to sit on, and she has a copy of the Alumni magazine, so she takes it out of her bag and she puts it on the bench and then sits down on top of it, right? Wow. That's not an Alumni magazine that's doing the job that we want it to do. You know, it was doing a job, but that's not what we want it to do. So first and foremost, any Alumni magazine to be successful has to be read. Beyond that, there are lots of different ways to do that. If you were to put you know, a bunch of the best magazines together on a table, I think one of the things that you'd notice is they all look very different. And that's good, and that's fine. And I think the reason for that is that another important element of an Alumni magazine is that it really has to match the character and priorities of the institution. So our magazine is going to look very different than a magazine from the University of Texas or the University of Chicago or UCLA, and that's rightfully so. You know, you want to produce a magazine that evokes and sustains the character of the institution that on whose behalf you're producing it. Beyond that, it's you know, it's gravy from there. If people are reading it, they're learning about your institution, they're spending time with your institution in their homes where we arrive however many times a year we come out. And so, but first and foremost, beyond anything else, it's got to be read. And it's not going to be read if it's boring. And it's not going to be read if it's full of marketing speak or things that sound like they're written by committee or things that just aren't interesting and don't grab you and aren't stories if it's not visually arresting. So it's first and foremost, a successful magazine is a magazine that's well read.
Couldn't agree more, and I love when I receive my University of Richmond Alumni magazine in the mail, so you're doing a great job. Dale, what do you think? Is there a formula for creating a special alumni magazine?
I wouldn't say there's a formula so much as I would say there's an essential mindset, which is, and you know, this gets at much of what Matt just ably talked about, which is you have to be realistic about readers, and in two respects. One is no one ever has to read us. An alumni magazine is never required reading. Not even my wife has to read it. And the fact that it's the people who oversee us, the senior administrators who control our resources and to an extent control our destiny and to varying degrees assert control over our content, I think often operate on the mistaken idea that, well, because it was sent to alumni, dear old alma mater, of course they'll read it. It came from Johns Hopkins, it came from Richmond, it came from Tufts. What do you mean they won't read it? And that's just not realistic. And we need to be realistic about what people do read, which is, you know, you just think about ourselves and think about our readers who subscribe to the New Yorker and Harper's and Smithsonian and Real Simple and The Economist and magazines like this. Those are people who, in those precious 60 to 75 minutes of discretionary time in the evening when they have an opportunity to read something for pleasure, they don't read reports, they don't read campaign pitches, they don't read advertising or promotional material, they read magazines, and what they read in magazines are stories. Well-crafted stories put together by writers and editors who know what they're doing, they're professionals, they know how to craft stories that people will read, and it's essential you do that, because when we come in from the mailbox with that stack of mail that everybody gets and collects at the end of the day, we have to win two different sorts. The first sort happens on that counter we all have, where we make three stacks, bills, junk, and magazines. It's essential we get into the magazine stack. The second time we have to win the sort is on the nightstand, or a desk in an office or whatever, home office, where of all the things that are there, and we know because we ask them that our readers, for example, at Johns Hopkins, subscribe to a lot of magazines. They have to pick us, and no one is going to pick us up because they thought, ooh, I'm in the mood to read a good university magazine. They're only going to pick us if they are thinking I'm in the mood to read a good story in a good magazine, and I'm going to pick up yours.
Yeah, agreed. And in some ways, not taking for granted, that folks are going to read the Alumni Magazine gets into a lot of ideas and constructs that we have about alumni engagement itself. I mean, not taking for granted that the alumni network is the most valuable network that someone might choose to engage with. So there's definitely interesting questions that prevail throughout the alumni engagement space, including the magazines. David, Brittan, what do you enjoy the most about your role as editor of the Tufts Magazine?
Well, certainly meddling in the design, but beyond that, I could probably answer that question on several levels. One is just being involved in a magazine. Period, I think, is tremendous fun, and it's a great. Magazines are a great vehicle for a university to get their message across, because magazines are associated with fun. As Dale was saying, it is discretionary reading. The reason that people choose to read magazines is because they're entertaining as well as informing. People come away from them feeling somewhat enlivened and like they've learned something of value, but they've learned it in a way that is fun, with beautiful, surprising images and stylish writing. And this is one of the few media where every page, every spread is designed. It has to look fresh. It has to look interesting. It has to grab you on your way to that recycling bin that Dale was talking about. So just working on a magazine, I think, is a real privilege. Working on Tufts Magazine, well, certainly one of the things that are most fun is we can write about just about anything, because the entire universe of Tufts alumni, they're into everything from life sciences, which is a big strength of Tufts University. So they're marine biologists, and they're working on cancer cures and public health issues in Africa. But we also have very strong creative artists. We have an affiliation with the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, so we get to draw on lots of really wild and wonderful visual artists. We have people out in the humanities, studying history and sociology, and we have economists, and all these things. Just the idea that and I personally, as a generalist, someone who never really had the patience to focus on one small academic or other discipline. For me, it's a real playground, and I just love that we can write about anything, and that I can meet such a wide variety of people.
Very good. And I think that about 100 viewers are watching the broadcast right now, which is a great number of folks. And I think that a lot of people are our colleagues, of course. They are magazine editors, alumni engagement pros across the country. So let's get into a little bit of the meat here, guys. Let's start with covers. I'm going to do an attempt to screen share some covers that you guys sent me in advance. Dale, let's start with you. How do you know when you've got a great cover? What are you looking for?
Well, the flip answer is I know it when I see it. A more meaningful answer to your question, I think, has to keep in mind the fundamental thing that the distinction between editorial text, editorial content, and the cover. Text is intellectual, the cover is emotional. The cover has to grab somebody's attention in an instant sort of way and say, first of all, pick me up, physically pick me up, and then has to say, now that you have me in hand, actually open me and start looking through the magazine, where then my expert designer has ample opportunity to snag the reader's attention for various stories and keep them in the magazine. But the cover is what gets someone to pick them up and actually open it and start perusing the contents. And that's got to be an instantaneous, I think, emotional response. If the cover makes me to work and get me to open the magazine. The cover has to make me think, and actually wonder, okay, what is this about? What might be in here? Might I be interested? It's not a good cover, and it's not that I'm averse to thinking, but in terms of creating a cover and knowing a good one, I know it's a good one when I, at a glance, realize that my attention has been arrested, and I'm thinking, oh, I wonder what's in there, and then pick it up.
And you had sent along two different covers, one an older version and one a redesign. I've got the older version queued up there. What's this one about?
Johns Hopkins has a long-standing problem with gender equity, and there have been any number over the decades, any number of commissions looking into the gender equity situation on campus. And this is in terms of people who work for the university, faculty and staff, pay equity, equitable opportunity, and so forth. So back in, when was this, 2007, I guess, we had another one of these commissions issued a report called Vision 2020. So we assigned a writer to delve into that report and talk to people about the situation, what the report recommended, etc.
And then a follow-up cover.
Yeah, this is our Gomez cover. This was after our redesign. This was the second issue once we got a redesign from Pentagram. And John Aston, the actor, is on the Johns Hopkins faculty, has been for a number of years. And we did, he was our cover story for this issue, which is a couple of years ago.
Very good. Next, let's see, I will stop my screen share and then we'll go back to it.
Ryan, if I could interrupt you just for 1 second and look
at of course, please.
The first cover, the pre-redesign cover about the gender equity report. I think looking at it now, that cover did nothing that I said a good cover needs to do. Yeah, I would not be happy with that cover now.
Okay. Why?
Dale, do you think that's just a matter of the passage of time or some other factor?
I suppose it's more than one thing. Passage of time is part of it, but just looking at it that's, I think, too much a captive audience cover. I thought that, it was a lovely illustration, but in terms of really snagging somebody, like, ooh, what's that about? I don't think it doesn't make much emotional connection with me, and it's also, and the other problem I have with that, and this was key to our redesign, which I'll talk about later on, is that it only indicates that there's one story in the magazine. It gives you no clue that there's other content, so that it looks too much to me like actually a gender equity report in and of itself, as opposed to a magazine that, among its many stories, has that one piece on gender equity.
Right.
And Matt, you had a number of covers that you sent over to me before the program as well, of all the covers that you've landed on for the U of R magazine. Which was the most successful and why?
Well, I sent you a couple of them.
Yeah.
The easy answer sort of is the first cover after we launched our redesign, which Pentagram also did, and I mentioned that one only because, first of all, it's a really lovely illustration, and because it was the first cover of the redesign after the old magazine, which it was generally agreed here that was pretty stale in terms of its design. So this just announced how incredibly different we had decided to go when we launched the redesign. So that's an easy one to pick out as one that got a lot of notice. But I think if you flip to the next one, this is the one that is my favorite so far, and it looks like the typography at the top where it says Spring Summer 2014 might have messed up a little bit in the PDF. But I really like this one because I think it's a really arresting image, to Dale's point, and I also thought it was somewhat daring as well. is very different from what we had been doing. Dale's point about his earlier cover was interesting because this doesn't suggest that there's only one story in the magazine. This doesn't suggest any particular story just by looking at it. If you notice, that we didn't even put a cover headline on this issue. It was the first issue where we didn't after the redesign, because we just thought the image was so arresting, and this would sort of grab you by the lapels or whatever you're wearing and ask you to open it. But at the same time, it does support a really great visual feature that we did. And if you flip to the next, here's one page from that feature. And the feature was a series of photographs by Cade Martin of, we're a university with a very strong liberal arts college, and so we were looking at people in the university community who have strong interest in the arts, but have some other piece of their lives for which they're better known. So the woman on the cover, her name is Kelly Yang. She's a sophomore swimmer, set a record in the butterfly, was terrific, but was also an art major. The figure you see here, posed like the Rodin in the middle, is a graduate named Paris Lennon, who had just played in the Super Bowl. He's played on the defense in the Super Bowl just before we did this photograph, but he was also an art major in college. And so we picked people who had intersections of art business, art and this, art and that, and composed these what we thought were really lovely photographs. And so that, I can't say what was the most successful cover because we don't specifically survey about the covers. So I don't know what people actually opened, but in terms of anecdotal feedback and just how I felt about them, I really thought we hit it out of the park with that swimmer cover. Our design director, Samantha Tanich, she oversaw all of those photo sessions, and we just got really sensational work that we were terrifically proud of. And when we saw that shot, we knew almost instantly that that was the cover. We had that gut reaction that Dale was just talking about.
Fantastic. And David, can you talk a little bit about the time that you spend deliberating on the cover of the Tufts Magazine, how that decision's usually made? And I've got some covers that you sent ahead for me to share as well.
Sure. We've developed kind of an interesting process in the last few years, especially since we switched to all visual covers. We don't have any text on our covers aside from the logo, and there was kind of a thought process that went into that. Largely just having, we can have more impact, we think, if we show a big, beautiful image, and that we can create some intrigue if there's some slight doubt in the reader's mind as to maybe what this represents. In fact, my two criteria that I use, or I want readers, prospective readers, to have two questions in their mind. One is, what the hell is this? And what is it doing in my alumni magazine? The one that you're showing now, I think, was it came closest to inspiring both of those queries, and we got more, I would say, more specific responses to this cover image than to any other. This came out shortly after the Boston Marathon bombings last year. It happens to be a photograph of a runner, Bobby Gibb, as he's a Tufts alumna, who was the first female to run the Boston Marathon back in the 1960s. She gate crashed it, and she had a lot of guts. But we started out contemplating a fairly conventional view. I don't know if you could show the sort of outtake of that. Yeah, it's just kind of a nice photo. It's a little bit, pushed on the processing, and but not really special. It does not, I figure, oh, this is an article about running, or it's an article about a runner. But then our inspired designers got the idea of making it very special and different by cropping in on it. And of course we got the ultimate compliment, which was a shout out on Dale Keiger's U-Magazineology blog. So I guess Dale liked that one too. But the process we go through, I created something called a taxonomy of magazine covers because we were kind of, a few years back, we were kind of getting stuck in a rather literal approach to representing content on our covers, And so we kind of sat down and looked at, well, what are all the different relationships between covers and cover stories? And there's, for example, a metaphorical approach that can be taken. Where you're showing something that is a metaphor for the content. You could show a caricature or a parody, or to use a big word that I love, synecdoche, where you're homing in on one small object that somehow represents a much larger concept. And so once we came up with this sort of taxonomy, our cover meetings became very interesting. And our designers got pretty excited by this concept, to the point that they were willing to put in a lot of extra effort experimenting with covers that we would never use.
Like this one, maybe.
No, actually, we did.
Oh, that one was used. Okay.
We did use that. How about show the one that involves? There we go. Paper product. Yeah, that got serious attention for about 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And it did actually. We did actually have a story that mentioned, shall I say, bathroom tissue, in a key way. But no, that didn't make it. But so we'll have our designers. They'll kick around a bunch of different ideas for representing the same story. Then they'll bring us some mock-ups and they'll make their pitch. But it always comes down to, like Dale said, what provokes that really gut reaction. It makes you say, "What the hell is that?" And that's sort of the criterion that we use.
We had a question come in over Twitter pertaining to covers, so I thought I'd throw it out to you guys and see what you felt like. How do you plan your covers? Cover inspired by content, or cover inspired by great cover idea that you create content around? Anyone want to take that one? That's from Eric Michael up on Twitter. Thanks, Eric, for that question.
I think it assumes we plan.
Right?
Yeah, I had sort of the same reaction as Dale. I mean, sometimes when you're working on a story, and our covers don't have to relate to the features, right? I mean, since we've redesigned, they have so far. We go to the printer in another month. We have no clue what's going to be on the cover of the next issue. I keep looking at the design director. She keeps looking at me. Something will emerge, but sometimes we know pretty early, just because we've seen something or we've had a thought that we think is lightning in a bottle that we want to run with. I'd be interested to hear David's reaction, because it sounds like they do a much more thorough process than I know that we do.
Well, I don't know if thorough is the word, but we do put some time in it because we like it, and because we know that's the most important page of the magazine. And I think you said you don't always consider the features as the cover doesn't always have to relate to a feature, and we've come to that conclusion as well. And I know some people object to that, but I've never heard a reader say, I'm really disappointed that outstanding cover image you had that got me to open up the magazine led me to a short profile instead of a feature. Nobody's ever responded that way. And in fact, in the redesign of Tufts Magazine, which just launched with our fall 2014 issue, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later, the cover photo, the cover image is in fact related to a very short piece, and nobody's complained, and everybody, we've had only positive feedback on the cover. So I think you can be very flexible as to what you consider to be a cover, and it just comes down to what you think is going to grab people. I don't know if you could show the yellow cover of.
Yeah, I can pull it up. Let's do that.
I don't know if is the whole thing showing. I'm only seeing a portion of it.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah, so that's the cover of the redesigned Tufts Magazine, and I love the reaction that I'm getting from Dale and Matt. That's exactly.
I think it's going to be on U Magazineology tomorrow.
Yeah.
well, thanks. But yeah, so we thought this is a really fun idea. We had some rather sober features and things that we thought, well, if we do cover images based on these, it's just not going to, we could not think of that magic one, the right one. But for this, that short story, which is about a prominent chef who's an alum who has a sort of a new approach to sustainable farming and dining, that we could use that. And So far it seems to be working.
Well, that cover to me says, "How could you not open it?" Right?
Okay, good.
When that comes in the mail, I feel like that's pretty automatic. Perhaps not. Guys, let's switch gears just a little bit and switch over to design. From a design standpoint, Matt, how or when do you know whether it's time to make a big change? As a UR alum myself, of course, I know that the communications team, along with Alumni Career Services Office, worked to create a new look and a feel for the publication not too long ago.
Right. Well, designs have a shelf life, and designs have a shelf life, and the decision to redesign the magazine here at the University of Richmond was made before I ever came. I mean, when I came on board, one of the reasons that they brought me on board was that they wanted to go through a redesign process, and they thought that I could help with that. But this was a staff that had aspirations that were much higher than the current design allowed for. The design that the magazine had previously, it was, it had been for a while very, very sort of tired. There was no energy around the design. There was no energy in the editorial content as well. I think it matched the design. There was a lot of focus on, here's institutional priority X, here's successful person Y, the sort of stuff that, back to David's point, when he was talking about his covers, he says, one of the questions he wants people to ask is, why the heck is this in my alumni magazine, in a good way? And so I think that the old design and the old editorial approach was in a lot of ways very typical of what you would expect from an alumni magazine, and I mean that in a sort of ho-hum kind of way. One example that I'll give is that before I came, they did a survey about the previous alumni magazine here and asked tons and tons of questions, all very good questions, but one of the things that they asked was, we're now sending it out 4 times a year, but what do you think if we send it out 3 times a year? And the answer they got back was, yeah, sure, that'd be fine. We don't really think we'd miss an issue. Well, that says that the magazine was not connecting with readers, right? It just wasn't engaging them. So, and the staff here was doing the best that they could with what they had, but there's a real energy and desire to let the design of the magazine breathe more, have more space, have more room, so it really matched the aspirations of the staff here. And that was everything. We sort of threw out the old magazine and started new, as you know, Ryan. New size, new paper, new departments, everything, top to bottom, just changed, and that's really opened up the possibilities for us to reconceive the editorial approach and to reconceive the design approach as well. And we think that we're making inroads so that people aren't going to use it to keep themselves dry during football games anymore, but actually keep it on the nightstand and maybe even pick it up.
Really profound changes in every way with respect to the U of R Alumni Magazine. If you hadn't, folks have a chance to zip over to the U of R site to find the latest edition, you should definitely check it out. Dale, we may have already talked about the before and after photos that you had wanted to talk about during this particular clip, and you also sent me an email with another cover photo, which I'm happy to share. Just let me know. But can you talk about some changes that you guys have made at Johns Hopkins over the last few years and why you made them?
Sure. We did a complete redesign in 2011, and the first issue in the new design came out in spring 2012. When we began thinking about this, we hired some smart, experienced publishing professionals to deliver critiques of the magazine. Including Rachel Morton, the former editor at Middlebury, who will be familiar to a lot of the people watching today. And they all came back with what we already knew in our bones, which was the editorial content of the magazine was consistently excellent, and the design was consistently flat and uninspired, and in some cases just bad, certainly tired. And static. It was too often jumbled. There didn't seem to be a guiding aesthetic to the design. It was dated. There was no consistency, so we didn't have a consistent look. So we, that kind of got us to pull the trigger, and we also saw it as an opportunity to rethink every aspect of the magazine. So we got some resources for a comprehensive and professionally done reader survey. And we started thinking about every last aspect of the magazine. Then we hired two wonderful designers from Pentagram, Abbott Miller and Kim Walker, to do the redesign. And one of the big changes that we wanted was, this may sound like a bit of a paradox, but we did not want the new magazine to look like an alumni magazine. We wanted it to look like a newsstand magazine that was full of content, that was current, topical, interesting, happened to be published by a university. All the editorial content in some form was connected to the university. But otherwise, except for class notes in the back, it was indistinguishable from any newsstand magazine that you might pick up. And we think they did a wonderful job with that. We went from saddle stitch to perfect bind. New paper, new typography, new design rules and template. We opened it up quite a bit so that it looked, much more current, a lot more white space. We decided to put more emphasis on photography and illustration that stood alone as just really striking imagery. And we're really thrilled with the results. And we're, I guess, like getting on 3 years in. Now that I'm editor, we're tweaking it a little bit, but not much. There's not going to be any substantial change because we really love what we've got, and we think it's going to work for the next several years. So we're going to leave it alone.
Very cool. And I think there's got to be at some point, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, or if people are enjoying it, don't continue to press on the redesign. I'm sure there's a whole sort of a feel to that. David, the next question I thought I would combine with one that I just saw on Twitter, which is a great question, is what sort of personality does the Tufts Magazine have, and how do you work to convey that personality? But the question on Twitter was, can you describe that personality or brand in 3 words?
Yes. Well, 4 words.
4 words.
Frisky as a colt.
Frisky.
I think of, yes, Tufts Magazine is pretty frisky, and we have a larger-than-life mascot. I don't know if people know this, but Jumbo the elephant, who was an actual real elephant in the late 19th century, very famous elephant. It was owned by the London Zoo and then by P.T. Barnum, who was one of the founders of Tufts. He's our mascot. So we have this wonderful animal mascot. We have a large veterinary school, the only vet school in New England. We're heavy into the life sciences. So we have a lot of animals in the magazine, I think I don't know if you have access to this page, but there's actually a photo of an iguana. Do you see an iguana?
That was in
in the latest issue. Anyway,
I'll see if I can find it while you're talking. Go ahead.
We tend to have a lot of animals prancing around the magazine, but sort of in the spirit, we try to keep things fresh and surprising, and not staid and academic and hoary and ivory covered. You could probably count the number of mortarboards that have appeared in Tufts Magazine during my watch, which is 8 years now. You could count those on one hand, I think. So we try to look like not an academic magazine. We try to look like something that people might voluntarily buy on a newsstand or subscribe to. And so, yeah, so it's a sort of frisky personality, I think, comes through in the type, especially in our recent redesign, where we introduced some new headline styles and a wider variety of types. Shorter articles were way too long before we redesigned, so that's another way we sort of keep it frisky and give people some fresh experiences on every page. And another thing we did that was really in tune with the personality of Tufts was that we divided the magazine up into 4 different themes. So it's sort of, I call them, 4 magazines in one, or 4 mini magazines in one. The life science component that I mentioned of Tufts now has its own section within the magazine. Tufts has a very strong public service component. We have there's a College of Citizenship and Public Service, plus we have a School of Diplomacy, the Fletcher School. So we have a section that's thematically devoted to that. We have a creative arts section that's devoted to the people in the arts and humanities, and then we have a university section devoted to the university history and people's relationship to the university. So those sort of separate aspects of Tufts' personality we have now compartmentalized in a way that we hope makes the magazine a little more digestible. Before, we think it was just a little intimidating, things that were coming at you sort of with fire hose-like intensity. But now we've sort of managed to section it off so that people can, find a part of the magazine that really corresponds to their interests, and so that's sort of been the heart of our redesign.
If I could pick up on that,
Sure.
Something that David said, you're talking about paying attention to the short pieces and having shorter content. That's something we paid a lot of attention to when we redesigned as well. Tina Hay over at Penn State, when she surveys, she asks a really smart question of readers about different sections. She says, very simply, did you read this, skim this, or skip it? And I kept that in mind when we redesigned quite a bit, because if you want to meet people where they are, and as editors, I think we all sort of fall in love with our long features, right? And Dale runs, as long features as anybody, and I envy that in some ways. But we've got to meet readers where they are, and so you've got to have this combination so that if somebody is, a skipper, you want to get them at least skimming. And the short pieces can do that. And once you've got them skimming, you hope that you can then move them up the ladder so that they're readers. It's sort of like the development pipeline in that way, in some ways. So we also paid a lot of attention to the short stuff. I mentioned that our departments were very sort of static and tired and staid, but they weren't all that flexible either. And so we really spent a lot of time building an architecture that gave us a lot of short stuff as well as the long stuff that as an editor I just love.
Well, and Dale, sort of your thoughts on the length of your content in your magazine and the strategy there, as well as where do your stories come from? How do you decide what goes in and what doesn't?
We've become conscious of a need to vary story length more than we have been, especially in our feature well. We had just a magazine staff retreat a few months ago and talked about like everything was on the table about how to proceed with the next year's issues of the magazine. And one thing that I have a perceptive, intelligent staff, the other people who make the magazine, and they noted that there was a certain amount of both graphic monotony and monotony setting in terms of like the feature well, which you could predict issue after issue would have a 6-page story and an 8-page story and 2 6-page stories, and nothing that was a couple of pages or 4 pages, nothing that was pretty much a graphic centered story with a photo essay or something like that, where the text was actually the minor part of it. We're very much a reader's magazine and a text-heavy magazine, so we're trying to break that up some and get a little more variety into it. Our reader survey indicated that our readers, their favorite part of the magazine was the feature well and the big stories on big ideas, and that's overwhelmingly what they said they valued the magazine for. So we're not going to abandon that by any means, but we're going to try and lighten up in some ways. We tend to be too much on the heavy, earnest side sometimes, I think, and so we're trying to lighten up a little bit. In terms of where stories come from, they come from all over. I mean, Johns Hopkins has a big, sophisticated news and information apparatus, so we were always getting copies of news releases and getting tips from people and notes. We get emails with story ideas and phone calls. We wander around and look at bulletin boards on campus, and I know people that I can call and check in with. People know that they can contribute ideas to me. Our editorial staff is out and about gathering ideas. You get them from the daily press, the science press, the internet, and so forth. Something that I've found is a continuing source of frustration in pitches I get from writers and suggestions I get from administrators or faculty or other people at the university, is that they don't give me ideas for stories. They give me topics. They're not story pitches, they're topic pitches. And that doesn't actually do me much good because I know the topics. What I need to know about are stories that I haven't already thought of, that the staff hasn't already thought of. Could be individuals that we knew nothing about prior to hearing a story idea. And you know, it's like finding the trick is to find the story in the topic. And that's where, you know, if someone, particularly freelance writers, endear themselves to me, is if I get a pitch that actually outlines a well thought through idea for a story.
Can I ask Dale a question? How do you explain to somebody who's pitching one of these topics? How do you explain the difference between a topic and a story?
I wish I had a great template, almost like a macro on my computer to do that. It's not always easy to get across. It's not always easy to get across to writers, which strikes me as strange. I think if anybody would grasp the difference quicker, it would be writers, but not so much. It's, you know, part of it is to say, okay, yeah, that topic, that subject area is of interest to the magazine, but now what do you want to say in that? Like, what story do you want to tell? Did this get your attention just because you thought, oh, there's something I might be able to sell to a magazine? Or is there something in there that resonates with you where, you know, you want to stop people and say, like, listen to this, you know, I met the damnedest guy today, and you got to hear about what he does. Or, you know, I heard this about this remarkable story, you know, like it was a story as in a narrative, the beginning, a middle, and an end, this like 10-year trajectory of someone's research project or life events, the way someone's career has gone, whatever. And it's you know, it's not an easy distinction to get across, clearly, because so often what we do get are just ideas for topics. And, you know, I'd like to do something for you on stem cells. Well, I know we could use a stem cell story, but like which one? And which one matters the most to you? Because if we find something that not only strikes me as potentially a good story for the magazine, but I can tell you're also wound up about writing, that you have some intellectual and emotional investment in it, then that increases the odds that I'm going to get from you, the writer, a really good story. So, but I've never worked out a great. I've had to explain the same distinction to writing students when I teach, and maybe it's an inadequacy of mine, but I've never hit on a really cogent explanation for the distinction.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and to dovetail off of Dale's point about the stem cell thing, and of course he could use a great stem cell story, but one thing that I learned from a colleague back at Dayton, Michelle Tedford, she would always look at a topic like that and ask, what's the story that only we can tell about that, right? I mean, Newsweek could do a story on stem cells, but what's the Johns Hopkins take on that? What's the Tufts take on that? What's the Richmond take on that? And so finding those stories that are, you know, come at a topic from the unique vantage that your institution has to offer, and that doesn't mean that it has to be set in a lab in your university, but finding a way that you can get at it in a way that nobody else can, I think helps you get at what the story might be that addresses that topic.
And I feel that same way in regard to the writer. We like as much voice in the magazine as possible, as many varied voices in the magazine as possible. So I want also a story in which the writer feels like, how is that story from that writer going to be different from anything else? And you know, if the same story by another writer, and if, you know, it feels like, sounds like a good fit, so much the better. Then we're really a step ahead of it.
I have a feeling we could probably do a show about that angle, how stories and content are connected to the styles and personalities of your staff. David, thinking about the idea of the Alumni Office at Tufts, it is an alumni magazine, of course, or at least largely the constituency it's designed for is alumni. How do you work with that group as far as content decisions for the magazine, and do they provide you with any suggestions or story ideas?
They are a great source of story ideas, and they actually write a large part of the magazine. Our class notes and the obituaries and our sort of weddings and ceremonies section, that all comes directly from our alumni folks, as do any news items about the Alumni Association itself. And they often will tell me about alumni that I didn't know. So someone who's got in touch with them and said, "Oh, do you know about my new company or my new book or something like that?" And we're not actually an organ of the Alumni Association, but we have a strong consulting relationship with them, and we realize that we have a lot of common goals. So we work closely with them. We accept lots of their story suggestions. We tend to develop them on our own according to our own editorial lights and experience, and they generally seem happy with the result. But generally, they're a great bunch of people, and with us, with a strong involvement in pitching of story ideas.
And one of the things, of course, that I think connects the three of you together and your at your universities is the fact that you work for university communications and you work in collaborative nature with your alumni team. Whereas, of course, here at the University of Virginia, Robert Vixilio and his great team work in the Alumni Association, and that publication puts out the Virginia Magazine. Matt, could you talk a little bit about the process at U of R and how the team comes together around what I guess ultimately goes into the magazine?
Sure. It's similar in some ways to what David described, in that we cast a big net, a wide net, with partners across the university, but then we have a core magazine team on our staff. Now, none of them are dedicated solely to the magazine. The designers and writers are working on a variety of other projects for clients across the university, but we come together as a team once a week. We go through the production schedule to see where we are on whatever it is we're producing that day. But we're also thinking and talking long-term about what it is that we want to do. And the editors in the office, not all of whom actually work very much on the magazine, apart from, they'll write stories here or there, but I'll meet with them weekly as well as part of a bigger editorial team meeting where we talk about the website and we talk about social media, and the magazine is one of the things in the mix. But great ideas come out of that. We have a close relationship with our media relations folks who are just down the hall from me as well. So we're getting story ideas from lots of different places. But then in terms of determining what actually goes into the magazine, we have an embarrassment of riches, as most universities do. There's far more than we could ever fit in any given issue of the magazine. And so it's a matter of curating and picking and choosing. And part of that is just paying attention to the reactions of one another as we talk about these story ideas, looking at what sparks interest and curiosity and further questions, what people want to know more about, thinking a little bit about how those intersect priorities for us, if there are things that we want to highlight that get at the character of the university, and just looking for that sweet spot where they intersect. So a lot of it is, you go on gut, you take chances, you work with writers you haven't worked with before, but you just sort of go from there.
And David, I'm here in university advancement. I have an alumni engagement role, but I work for the fundraising apparatus of the University of Virginia, or at least the central one. And I'd like to think that perhaps there's an opportunity, if not a subtle one, to include fundraising messages in the Alumni Magazine. Now I know that Robert over at Puts Together the Magazine has a different take about that. What's your take as far as how fundraising messages go in alumni magazines, or whether they do not at all?
Our take is you have to be very, very careful. We're fortunate to have advancement people here who are sophisticated in that they realize it's kind of an uphill battle. You can't just tell people, "Oh, give to us," and they'll whip out their wallets. and they recognize that the magazine is not really a tool for doing that. So certainly we have advancement content and an advancement component. Yes, we have articles about donors and scholarships and various forms of financial aid, but it's all in the context that the relationship between the Alumni magazine and its readers, the alumni, it's a long romance. You've got to be generous and give. As a magazine, we have to give a lot to our readers, and not otherwise they'll sort of recoil at the idea. Oh, here they are coming. They're coming into my home asking for my money all the time. We realize that won't work, and readers have told us that doesn't work, because we have had in the past an advancement section of the magazine that readers told us in a recent survey that was their least favorite section, and no surprise there. So we do we continue to have advancement-related stories, but we have attempted now to start sprinkling them throughout the magazine in the sort of the themed section that is most closely related to the content. So we have an upcoming story about a scholarship for veterans. But clearly that's an advancement story, but we're not just going to make it a story about, oh, well, you should be contributing to this scholarship fund, or let's recognize the donors, though that part is important too. But we're also going to have a companion piece by a very brave U.S. Marine veteran who went to Tufts, who has some very interesting things to say about what he thinks is what veterans have to offer to universities. What somebody with combat experience who's actually been in the war can do in an environment where people tend to be kind of academic and theoretical, and how that can transform people. So we can use what could have been a conventional give us your money kind of a story, but give it now a much more interesting human dimension, and make it work that way. And you have to do something. You have to give something with the advancement stories, and it can't just be asking.
I think that's absolutely right. First, Matt, then Dale. What about your takes, guys, on fundraising and marketing inside the Alumni magazine?
Well, I think you have to. It's important to distinguish between marketing and advertising, and I think it's easy to confuse the two, right? I mean, advertising is one form of marketing, but what we're really in is as David said, is the relationship business, right? We are stewarding over the very long term the relationship that alumni have with the institution, and we're doing that not by asking them for something, but by giving them something, and by reflecting what this institution is, and shaping their perception of it, saying this is, in some ways, this is still the great place that you fell in love with when you were a student, but it's even better, and you're still a part of it, right? And so that's really what we're doing, and part of who we are is philanthropy, right? It would be silly to ignore that aspect of our institution, but the minute you label a section or a story, oh, this is the advancement story, this is the fundraising story, this is where we ask you for money, as David said, readers universally tune that out, right? The analogy that I always use is you don't want to gather with your family around the Thanksgiving table and have your cousin sit down and try to sell you a used car, or even a great brand new car. I mean, I don't mean to imply that the product is cheap, but that's just not what the relationship is about. There's a time and a place for that ask. But the magazine, it supports and it builds that relationship so that when the ask comes, it's more likely to be successful. But in terms of coming hat in hand in the magazine, it's just, not only is it's not smart because it's not effective and it doesn't work as much as anybody wants it to work. It just doesn't work. And so there are better ways to do that.
Dale?
I think I'm going to reiterate what Matt just so cogently expressed, but you have to play with the magazine. You have to play the long game, and I believe that the primary function of an alumni magazine is foster and sustain the ongoing engagement of graduates with the institution. It's because it's people who are been engaged over a long period of time, who still feel like they are part of the institution, who still feel like the institution is providing them with something that broadens their horizons, that educates them in some ways, that keeps them informed, and that says the institution still cares enough about them to perform this service 2, 3, 4, 6 times a year. That's what you want, because it is those people who feel like they're still part of the thing that are interested in supporting it. And I think we implicitly promote the Johns Hopkins University by trying in every issue not to promote it, but to exemplify it. And if you think about it, a lot of us are under pressure from time to time to think in terms of the return on investment. What's the university getting for the money it invests in the magazine? Because these magazines are not cheap. And if you think about it this way, what's an issue, a single issue cost? $2, $4, $5. Let's say $5. For $5, you get into the house of a potential donor or an actual donor. And if the people who produce that magazine have done their jobs properly, you're in the house for a week or 2 weeks or a month, exemplifying the institution, representing the institution, implicitly promoting it by being there. And for a couple of bucks, you get to be in the house for several weeks. I don't think you can beat that. And I think overt campaign messages, campaign stories, and appeals for money in the magazine as editorial content, they just don't work because nobody reads them, which means the development people have wasted their time crafting that message because it was never received by anybody. And I think it's actually hurt the magazine because it somewhat degrades its content, because people now feel like, I like this magazine as a magazine, but they've just annoyed me here by asking me for money.
And guys, we've reached the 2 o'clock hour, so final questions for each of you. And I thought this was a fantastic show. I really appreciate it. And I can see by my counter that lots of people have held on and stuck with us throughout the hour. So thank you very much if you have done so. Okay, Matt, final question for you. What is the best advice you've received in your role as editor?
Oh gosh, the best advice. That's a hard one to answer, but I'll try to be quick. So I'm going to burn through 3, but I promise it'll be very quick. One is the late Sean Presley, who edited Kenyon Magazine, said college was fun. Your magazine should be too. So I always bear Sean's words in mind for that. Maureen Harmon, who edits Denison, explained to me in a way better than I've ever heard who our competition is. Dale was talking earlier about his magazine readers subscribing to Harper's and Atlantic Monthly and so on. They also have dishes that need, in Maureen's words, they also have dishes that need to be washed. They've got dogs that need to be walked, kids they want to play with. That's our competition, right? That's what we're competing for. And then the last, it's not really, the last thing that I'll mention is not really advice, but I was really lucky to come to the University of Dayton at a time when was the editor, and just his quiet example was, he was highly respected. And I just sort of watched him and learned from him over the years. He didn't offer a lot of overt advice and guidance, but just through his example, he taught a lot to me about what it means to be a good editor. He was a very original thinker. He was a very graceful writer, and picking up on Dale's point, he really took the long view of the institution and the magazine, and I just learned more from him than I could ever say.
Great. And Matt, thank you so much for being on the program today. Go Spiders.
Thank you for having me.
And I always look forward to having the magazine in my mailbox. Dale, how bold is too bold for a university magazine? Is generating a negative emotional response okay when the majority is a positive one?
Well, the too bold story is the one that gets you fired. But if in a perfect world, I don't think there would be anything that we would consider too bold or too provocative. I don't think we need to hold the hands of our readers. Our readers are smart, sophisticated, literate, aware people. We educated them, and they can handle controversy. They can handle being provoked. They can handle divergent views. And they can handle something that's, a story about some aspect a university that maybe is not so complimentary to the institution. They're not going to like throw it across the room and say, that's it, I'm never again having anything to do with that school. But we work for people who are inherently cautious, who often take it. And, when I'm thinking about stories for upcoming issues, I certainly always have to be conscious of how it's going to go over with senior administration, how it's going to play, what the response might be. And a lot of times, I think ahead, and sometimes we'll try to lay the groundwork on something in advance, so that the waters are not so roiled when I go ahead with the story. I think the best magazines approach this stuff as journalists, and recognize that controversy is interesting, and they move away from the positive or negative story idea, which is that's a concept, not a journalistic concept.
And final word today, David, Brittan, a fictional university starting their first edition of their Alumni Magazine. What advice do you have for their recently hired editor?
Run! Aside from that, listen to your readers, know your readers, put yourself in your readers' shoes. That's all you really need to know. Just stick to that.
Very good. Well, thanks again, everybody. I really do appreciate you spending time with us today here on Advancement Live. Thanks again to my guests, Dale, David, and Matt, for their time and energy putting on the show. I do hope that you'll follow me on Twitter at Ryan Catherwood, connect with me on LinkedIn. I do hope that you will share the show when I repost it on HigherEdLive.com and pass it around. That's what this is all about, sharing the knowledge. So have a happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there. And we'll look forward to Andrew Gossen's show in the early part of December. And I'll be back in the latter half of December before the Christmas holidays with another edition of Advancement Live. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you, gentlemen.